Israel, the occupier, cut the timeline.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective.
Greetings and salutations. My name is JJ Weinberg. I am an artist, an activist, an alchemist, a Jew, a Hindu, a Christian, and I am none of these things. I added that last part because of one, what we're going to talk about today, and two, because it's a reminder from Gandhi when he says, I am a Muslim, a Jew, a Hindu, a Christian, or I am none of these things. And he's talking about the expansion of perspective. And that's what this show is called. First, I want to start by thanking the underwriters for this program, Voga, Barnes, and Denny. Thank everyone here at WVLP. We're living in a very precarious time. It's weird because we have history, and then we have that old adage that those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We have the indefensible shredding, total evisceration of the Voting Rights Act by the same motley crew that brought us the Charlottesville Tiki Torch Gang. Blood and soil. Jews will not replace us. Those bros. So the Overton window seems to be sliding backwards. And this was always the dog whistle of great again in the rhetoric. Great again implies that sometime in the past was great, but not now. The question I'm posing today in this episode is, am I supposed to believe that the same red hats that couldn't vehemently condemn the neo-Nazis marching on Charlottesville are now concerned about anti-Semitism? Like those same people? I just remember specifically when Donald Trump was being grilled on that situation. What do you want me to call him? What is it you want me to say? This is a man who never minces his words when he wants to come up with insults. He had more insults for Rosie O'Donnell than he did neo-Nazis marching in the street saying, Jews will not replace us. Blood and soil. So I'm suspect on what all this means, on this notion that Donald Trump is Netanyahu's lapdog. I would think potentially it's the other way around. Mainly, we follow the money. But right now, whether it's Israel or the U.S., we have to be able to condemn the actions of a government without sliding into a mass indictment of the people. We indict Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth. Those of us who are honest have criticized and been critical of, whether it's Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Bill Clinton. If you're not in a Crips versus Blood, if you're not just drawn in by the pro wrestling kayfabe and the sports fervor of choosing a team, you should be able to criticize, to be a moral indictment, if nothing else, on actions of people if they're falling short. But we're talking about individuals, leaders that we all know have in some capacity gotten into their role by means that we would criticize, that we would think are maybe somewhat shifty. So it's like, we know, and especially with the way that Donald Trump has completely, what would you say? I just demolished, I guess, the decorum at the very least of the presidency. I mean, you can say what you will about policies or anything else, but no one can refute that he's just smeared the office of any sort of reverence. So we can indict and bring moral charges against these individuals without indicting all of the people, especially when we've seen the historical precedent for the naming of people in question. In this episode, we're going to talk about where even the word can become a slur itself when the context is shifted. Jew. He's so Jewish. We'll get into that later, but it's all about perspective. And it takes understanding about how these tools and scapegoating have been used throughout history. Centuries long. We're not just talking 1930, 1945 Nazi Germany. It's before that. It's before Henry Ford and his Nazi rag, the Dearborn Independent. It's way before that. So this question, I've seen this question come up as I'm talking about things on the internet or to people. Are you a Zionist? Bro, are you a Zionist? First of all, you add the bro to it, and automatically you can tell that it's not a neutral question. But even just simply, are you a Zionist with no inflection isn't a neutral question. It's a signal flare. It assumes a fixed definition. When again, in reality, Zionism, Zion, the idea of Zion spans history, identity, politics, belief. Without defining the terms, the question turns people into caricatures, and it forces a false binary. And that's what I'm suspect of, especially when we look at the principal players, especially when we know how propaganda has worked throughout the centuries. It's alarming because we know where this caricature has taken us historically. But it's like asking, do you believe in God? Without asking what you mean by God, without defining the terms. The terms aren't clear. So that question really isn't honest. It's a trap disguised as clarity. And it's not even always a trap. Sometimes it's just, again, that question, do you believe in God, can be innocent enough, but when a person doesn't define the term, it means so many different things to so many different people. If you go back episodes to this, I'm Your Huckleberry Finn, the God panel, the God tag, we're talking about that. Val in his project was saying, maybe if I just meditate on this word and repeat it so many times in this piece of artwork, I'll finally get it right. It's a question. What does it mean, this word God? So if it means to you, a guy in the sky with a gray beard that throws down lightning bolts when you're bad and presents when you're good, and to me it means something akin to the Force from Star Wars. We're just now here into May. May the 4th was not long ago here, right? May the 4th be with you. If to me it means the Force, and we ask that question, and I say, yes, I believe in God, and the person who believes in the lightning bolts, graybeard God, says, yes, I believe in God, they're talking about two different things. We would be talking about two entirely different things. But what happens in this situation, Zionism, it creates a straw man where people can argue with a version of things that the other person isn't saying and isn't believing in. Like myself personally, I've never defended Netanyahu. I've never defended Trump. I would never defend bombing civilians. I mean, I don't believe in killing other humans in general. I don't even believe that the Second Amendment is a so-called God-given right for us to shoot others in the face. I mean, especially coming from a Christian perspective. If you were to come at it from a Christian perspective, Jesus says, put away your sword. So there's really no room for that. I believe that, anything leaning towards righteousness leans towards empathy and love. At the very extreme of that, it would be turning your other cheek for as long as we can. If you get struck on one cheek, turn the other cheek. That's the injunction. That's the Christian principle. Where are these Christians that are, have a Bible and a rifle? That part doesn't add up. And I just believe it's because we're supposed to be evolving past violence. I know that people aren't at scale. I think if you look at the arc of history, it looks like we're slightly moving in the direction towards getting away from violence. That's what I would like to believe. That's what I would espouse, is getting past violence in all forms. I mean, violence just lacks creativity and curiosity to just collapse into fighting and violence. I talked a couple episodes about this word that I coined this year, domopolitics, the politics of your home. So that's in your country. Well, the first space would be in your actual home, in your home, like inside of your house. Violence doesn't belong inside of your house. And many of us have experienced it inside of our homes. I experienced it growing up with my dad, was violent. And violence can be verbal too. We see that at scale. Again, back to a criticism of Donald Trump. His violence and his rhetoric is present on a daily basis. But so violence first in our home, then violence in our city, in our state, in our country, and then finally abroad. But we've got to be able to deal with the politics at home. So we can criticize these people, but I'll push back on collapsing the history of the entire Jewish people into a word and acting like it explains everything. So if we say just equivalent to say Zionism equals genocide, that's the same kind of flattening that I call out everywhere else. It turns a complex history and a range of beliefs into a single cartoon villain. Zionism, the notion of Zion at its base, is just the idea that the Jewish people, who we know historically were exiled, persecuted, and nearly wiped out of living memory. And again, we're not just talking about Nazi Germany. The diaspora, the displacement took place a long, long time ago, centuries ago. But the idea that they would have a place that was home tied to their actual history is what we're talking about. That's what the idea of returning to Zion is. That doesn't mean that every government action in Israel is justified. It doesn't mean every version of Zionism is good, but the concept itself isn't the cartoon that I've seen people turning it into. And when I look underneath these posts, when I see them on Facebook or Instagram or X or whatever the heck it is, I see the commentary underneath, and it's uplifting an old stereotype, and that's what's concerning. It's seeing Kanye West go on full-scale anti-Semitic tirades and then selling out SoFi Stadium 2 nights in a row. 160,000 people. It's no worries. He gets the pass. Why? That's what's concerning. And when you look at the language and the things that Kanye said, and then the commentary underneath the things that he's shared and espoused, it's It's the same caricature. It's the same cartoon. And sometimes I don't think people are even doing it on purpose. Part of it comes from not understanding and knowing history. But that's even more of a reason to be concerned. It likely means the misdirection has a pilot. Pilate. That makes me think of Pontius Pilate. We'll come back to Pilate. But I'm certainly not defending a government. The conversation, though, it just keeps getting reduced to slogans. Slogans, like we've seen what the slogans do. They just ignore history, identity, and nuance. You can stand for Palestinian lives, and you should. I do, 100%. And you can criticize Israeli leadership or the U.S. leadership. You should. I do too. But if the argument turns into this entire concept of Zion is evil and acting like that's the whole story, then I'm going to push back every time. Caring about civilians isn't the same as rewriting history to make an argument seem clearer. Like, I've not defended Netanyahu. I haven't defended killing civilians, starving people, bombing innocent lives. I don't believe in the bombing of Iran. Violence, again, it's wrong to starve, bomb, torture, full stop. We can't afford to ignore the rhetoric, though, around some of the content that's being shared because of the actions of a certain few people. If you read the comments, I'm telling you, I've seen it. It's straight up anti-Semitic garbage. People going on the blood and soil rants. Things that are coded in the comments section because they're afraid that they'll get struck down and they'll get muted by the algorithm. So instead they say things like, the German painter was right. Or it looks like the man with the mustache was always telling us the truth and we've been lied to this whole time. That's in the comments. I'm telling you. Some of them are probably bots. Yes. Actually, I will say this. All of them are bots in some capacity because that's what I was talking about with a pilot in the misdirection. Viktor Frankl, as we're talking about Nazi Germany. We've talked about him so many times here. Man's search for meaning. A human being is a deciding being, right? He says the last of the human freedoms is the ability to choose how you'll react to any situation. They can never take that from you unless you give it away. So when he's saying a human being is a deciding being, the reason why it comes to my mind right now is because when I'm saying that these are bots, it's the same thing with this idea of Russia hacking the elections. I think it was misrepresented. It's like the idea that Russia came in and changed anything on actual voting machines was never what was in question. The idea was about hacking the algorithm and sending bots and sending misinformation and sending all these scare tactics to people on social media that then they bid on because it hit their identity in the softest and the weakest spots. That in that capacity, they hacked not so much systems. The only system they hacked was the human system. They hacked into the fear and into the identity politics. And so when Viktor Frankl says a human being is a deciding being, the reason why it came to mind again is because a lot of these people aren't deciding to say these things. They've been hacked. I genuinely believe that. But we don't get to ignore that just because it's inconvenient, just because it doesn't make it easier to just scapegoat and say this is an enemy. Because if we saw the same kinds of posts under something that Trump said, we immediately say, why are these people so comfortable here? Why do these Charlottesville jackbooted neo-Nazis feel so comfortable? Again, not every person that voted for Trump is a neo-Nazi racist, but every neo-Nazi racist voted for Trump. And he was okay with it. We're talking about opportunism of individuals. I don't know enough about Israel's politics. I don't know enough about where they're at as a people, right? Because again, we see in the streets, we're like, we don't want Trump. So many of us are just completely diametrically opposed to what this movement has looked like. So, we can criticize Israel and their leadership. We absolutely should, just like we criticize Trump. But criticizing power is not the same thing as erasing history or repeating rhetoric that clearly overlaps with people who are being openly anti-Semitic. And that's what I'm saying. So if you're making posts, if you're at scale talking about this thing in a way where people who are openly anti-Semitic can jump on board, then we might want to have a little bit of a question mark about what that means. Because that's where it starts to look less like informed critique and more like we're being pulled into something that we don't fully understand. So if the same rhetoric is attracting people that we normally would stand against, it's probably worth asking why instead of pretending it's not happening. So going to some pop culture here, a place that we're familiar with, Zion, is in the Matrix, right? In Zion, there isn't random. It's deliberate. Zion in the film, it's the last human city, the last place of actual lived truth, the refuge from the illusion of the Matrix. It's the home you return to when you wake up. Woke, right? That's a whole nother lane of what I'm talking about here. The way words, terms, things that have meant something to people for such a long time have been stripped away, have been dismantled, and reorganized through propaganda machines. Like, to say woke and to be woke had nothing to do with being able to identify as a cat, as a child, and have to have a litter box in a schoolroom. That whole thing was a misinformation. It's like a whole thing just to dismantle the idea of what woke has meant to so many people through generations. When we talk about the Green Book, when we talk about redlining, all of these things like police brutality. But then it's like, well, let's just completely destroy what the word woke means. That's a tactic. And when we look at Zion, when we look at Israel as concepts for people and what the meaning has been, we have to consider those kinds of agendas. But the idea of Zion, for the Matrix, maps directly over, the more allegorical meaning. Not just a place, but a symbol of return to truth and liberation. So the Wachowskis, what they're tapping into wasn't a political statement about modern Israel. They're influenced by the deeper, older metaphor. Zion equals a place where reality is actually real and you're free. So Zion in the Matrix is even less about territory. It's about awakening and a return to truth. So today, Zion has been compressed only into this political argument instead of understood as a spiritual and historical symbol. A place as well, of course, but there are so many things. So when people hear Zion, they don't hear return, origin, identity. They hear politics, conflict headlines, and Benjamin Netanyahu. But a word can have a real meaning, like woke, and then get polluted by how it's used. And again, some people are deliberately doing this. We have to see that, like, what happened with the word woke politically. And like I said earlier, Jewish, just saying Jewish can and has been used as a slur. Jewish, Jew, is a slur when used with the different inflection in different context. So in like a neutral, accurate way to say it would be, my name is J.J. Weinberg. I'm Jewish. My last name and identity, my great-grandfather was the first generation over here. Some of my religious perspective is Jewish, and some of the culture I grew up around was Jewish. The distorted version is he's so Jewish because he was trying to get a deal. I got Jewed out of that. That stereotype, that coded insult implying greed, manipulation, etc. All of this goes back even to Caiaphas in the Bible. It goes back to Caiaphas as a historical figure. But again, people don't know these histories, and they don't know how deeply entrenched the ideas are. So a word, it's not dangerous on its own. It's dangerous when it carries a history, again, of how it's been used to reduce people to a caricature. So Zion, again, I just see it being right now, it's like a mirror from some of this stuff that's happened in the past. And that's why people are concerned about the idea of anti-Semitism rising, because Zion's getting reduced from a deep symbol into a political weapon. The idea of Jewish reduced from an identity into a stereotype. That's what Kanye was doing. And again, the trope is the same. The media greedy Jews, the secret cabal that controls everything. People reduced from human beings into caricatures. So the problem isn't the words, it's what people load into them. And the idea of Zion is being chipped away at and eroded. And I'm just saying, I believe it's purposeful. The same thing was done with Christ. So many Christians they just do not even come close to knowing the depth of the actual man that walked in Galilee, that walked in Jerusalem, in this land, this place of Zion. So the idea of Zion and where Zionism originates, it refers to Jewish self-determination and the historic land of Israel. And in common modern language, it often means support for the continued existence as a Jewish state. That is true too. But that doesn't automatically mean support for every action of the Israeli government, any more than being American means endorsing every U.S. president or policy, any more than it means that we can't be shameful or at least honest about where we came from, about what we did with chattel slavery, about what we did to the Native American population. Constantly on here, we talk about the founding daddies, and we'll get into that a little bit. But that question, bro, are you a Zionist? If that means that I believe that Jewish people came from a place before their displacement, yes, I do. I believe Italians, the language and the culture, were developed in this area, this geographical area that we refer to as Italy. I believe that Germans came from an area that we call Germany. At the same time, in this age of mass transportation, the internet, globalization, I'm not really nearly so concerned with the imaginary lines that we draw in the sand. I mean, in 2008, I know we've talked about it here before, I wrote a song called No Nations, just one world consumer population. And I'm talking about the only absolutes are Walmart and Target at the end of the day. But in terms of history, of course, I believe that people have flavors and styles of perspectives that were shaped over time by the nurture of the environment from where they came. And I don't believe that Jews are aliens. Like they didn't just show up one day on the planet. Just like Germans, just like Italians, they had to come from a place. Would that not be completely natural to think, especially in the early days of humanity and tribal identity? They came out of the earth the same way that an apple tree apples, like Alan Watts talks about. We came from the earth. And I'm saying that these, now in globalization with the internet and everything else, everything's getting kind of into the major melting pot. We call the United States the melting pot. But now it's like the whole world is a melting pot. But regardless, at some point in time, we came up through nurture of different areas. And that gave us different languages and different perspectives and different tones to our skin and our hair and all of these different things that make variety as the spice of life. Again, we can criticize the founding daddies. We can be critical of our educational system, which I definitely am. A great book, if you've not read it, is Lies My Teacher Told Me, or The People's History of the United States of America. Couple great books to check out. That you're not going to get that kind of stuff in a school system that's built on patriotism, the patron saints of the United States. And that's what they want, to make America great again. They want to keep us just in that full adoration without the criticism. But we need to be able to criticize our media and our government at scale. We have to make a distinction, though, between government and people. Because something like anti-Semitism can find a foothold by collapsing individuals into a hated collective. That's how it worked in the 1930s. After World War I, the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was economically devastated, psychologically shaken, and the Nazis built a simple, emotionally powerful claim. Germany didn't lose the war fairly. Nope, we didn't lose the war fairly. This sounds familiar. We didn't lose. Can never lose. We didn't lose. We were cheated. It was, quote unquote, betrayed from within. And this became known as the stab in the back myth. Jews betrayed as disloyal citizens, war profiteers, controllers of finance and media. Controllers of finance and media in Nazi Germany. This is one of the main turning points, one of the main convictions, one of the main stories, one of the main propaganda tools, the controllers of finance and media. And we hear it again echoed specifically in Kanye West, and I've seen it at scale. The secret manipulators behind communism and capitalism. It was a contradiction, of course, but it's still effective propaganda. The goal, though, is never logical consistency. It's emotional saturation. The Nazis even reshape Christianity outright. They remove the Jewish roots of the faith. I mean, and that had been happening since Constantine, to be honest. But the Nazis really pushed this forward. They reject the Old Testament because it's Jewish scripture. They recast Jesus as a heroic Aryan figure. I mean, again, does this not sound familiar? Like, in two places. Obviously, we've seen it with our Dr. Trump. And then, but even more recently, which is so crazy, if you've seen The Boys on Amazon Prime, I'm not going to give anything away or spoil it, but man, it's hitting the nail on the head with what's happening. But you would think that they're directly lampooning this idea of Dr. Trump and the whole savior thing that's happening on Truth Social and everything else. You would think that they were directly referring to that, but these episodes are just now coming out. They were filmed probably at least months ago, if not a year ago or more. So they couldn't possibly know. But are they prophets? Or is it just that this is a really easy thing to kind of guess at what's going to happen when we're going along these same lines, these same tropes? You know, I mean, with all of the inconsistencies that Trump's character represents, with all of the inconsistencies of the right. And I'm sorry if you're like, I have friends on the right. I try to talk about this all the time. You can't be a Second Amendment supporter and a Christian at the same time. You just can't. You cannot be rejecting immigrants and the poor and tell me anything about Christ. He was full of love and empathy. These do not reconcile, period. And so here we are. The Nazis reframed Jesus as a fighter against corruption instead. You know, a symbol of purity and sacrifice. And sometimes even positioning him as opposing quote unquote Jewish influence. That's insane. And again, so many people, because of this conflict that's centuries old, ages old, without people exploring history, without people reading or trying to understand, Jesus was Jewish. Jesus was Jewish. He lived, breathed, and died as a Jew. His teachings were rooted in Jewish tradition. But propaganda isn't about accuracy. It's about alignment with ideology. Groups like the German Christians tried to merge Nazism and Christianity by supporting Adolf Hitler as divinely appointed, removing pastors who resisted. This shouldn't sound contemporary. They were trying to say that Adolf Hitler was divinely appointed, removing pastors who resisted. What we see with the Pope right now, currently. Why does this sound contemporary? I mean, is this the next episode of The Boys? Or the next episode of Biff Tannen, Donald Trump? You know? So the question comes back again to why we can't afford to let people misrepresent, like an individual misrepresent a movement or people. Does Hitler cosplaying as Christ make Christianity a scourge? Does Trump cosplaying as Christ mean that Christianity is bad? Does the Klan burning crosses making anyone who goes to church a violent racist? That same caricature, it's been applied, we've seen it applied to Muslims. Like I remember, I've said here before, Cat Stevens, my favorite musician of all time. And after the attacks, 9/11, there was a time when Cat Stevens was singing some of his music a cappella. He was doing Peace Train. He hadn't recorded in many, many years. And I'll never forget when he was flying into the States to work on an album, to, you know, get into this zone of what he had been for so long, for so many people in pop culture, of a spiritual searcher. But he had converted to Islam, and he had changed his name. His name is Yusuf Islam. And when he was trying to fly into the United States, he was detained and deported. And they said that he was on a terrorist watch list. Cat Stevens, the man who wrote Peace Train. He had, at that same time, he had won the European Man of Peace Award. But yet, we kicked him out of the country. Now, the question is, was he really a threat in the sense that he was a threat because he was a Muslim terrorist? That was just the way that they could paint it and portray it. And it's disgusting. What they really knew that he was a threat of is that he would be talking about bridging Christianity and Islam. Like, most people don't even know that Jesus is in the Quran, that his name is mentioned more than Muhammad's name is in the Quran. Like there's so many commonalities, but again, divide and conquer is always the strategy. So the Jews killed Jesus is a centuries old smear campaign. And being that we still lack clarity on the truth of that and why it was spun this way for centuries, it's revealing, but only if we're woke, only if we go into this with our eyes open. The oldest Christian anti-Semitic smear it's not even simply that the Jews killed Jesus. It was the transformation of this specific political Roman execution into a mythic blood guilt charge against an entire people. Again, historically, Jesus was a Jew. His followers were Jews. His movement began as a Jewish movement. So the conflict wasn't Jews versus Christ. It was Rome. It was collaborating local elites and a threatened priestly power structure crushing a Jewish teacher whose message endangered their authority. Caiaphas, for example, the high priest, as he's called, which we'll get into that, Caiaphas wasn't the Jewish people. He was a Roman installed, Roman dependent temple power broker operating inside an occupied system. Was he an opportunist? Yes. What do you know? This helps us create this caricature. But how many individuals do we know that are opportunists? You know, his interest was order, status, survival, and mainly power. In that sense, he functions not as a symbol of Judaism, but as a collaborator within the empire. But he's collaborating with an empire as they're occupied. So they say the high priest condemned him, as if the title of high priest itself were the crime. Now that's a fine piece of theater, see? Because the title was real, ancient, sacred, weighty, with centuries of tradition. But by the time of Caiaphas, that robe didn't hang freely in the temple. It hung from a Roman nail. It swayed in the breeze of empire. You don't become high priest without Rome's permission. And you definitely didn't stay high priest if Rome lost its patience. So what is this rebel rouser, Jesus, going around talking about love, healing people? Who is this guy? And they're calling him king? Caesar's none too happy. So what are we looking at? A priest? Yes, but also a politician, a negotiator, a man trying to keep the peace so Rome wouldn't burn the whole city down again. And then along comes a Jewish teacher, speaking like a prophet, stirring hearts, unsettling order, threatening the delicate arrangement between power and peace. But his followers, the people that he was unsettling, were Jews. Now Rome knows exactly what to do with men like that. Rome has only ever known one language: the cross, violence. Pilate, back to Pilate, the man notorious for just being ruthless. So the cross, it wasn't a religious punishment. The crucifixion was a billboard of terror, a message nailed into the flesh. This is what happens when you challenge the empire. And the man who authorized it. He's not a priest, Pontius Pilate. He's a governor with the reputation for brutality. No mercy. So Rome did not ask permission. This idea that Rome is asking permission from the Jews is so obscene. It's absolutely ridiculous when you understand and know the history. Rome didn't ask permission. Rome gave orders. But history can have very clever editors, right? It takes the Roman hand off the hammer and nails and wipes it clean, and then slowly turns the camera, zoom in tighter still. Let's get a shot. We don't want to see all the rest of those Jews. We just need to see this high priest. The high priest, that's a good one. We can use that title. One man becomes the moment. The moment becomes the story. The story becomes the accusation. And before long, this title, meant to signify one office in one place at one time, is stretched across an entire people, across centuries, across continents. The high priest did it becomes the Jews did it. And you can make the argument that they're screaming for Barabbas and that there's Jews that are saying it. We got a lot of people in red hats that would scream a lot of the same kind of stuff. I'm not talking about individuals or even groups. We're talking about an entire nation of people. Jesus' followers were Jews. They weren't the ones putting him on the cross. They were the ones wanting to try and take him down. The Jews did it isn't history. It's narrative design. That's the empire laundering its own violence through religion and calling it righteousness. I mean, to think about the Crusades years later, to think about the Roman Catholic Church being one of the largest early dispensers of Christian language, Roman, and it was the Romans who destroyed this man. So that's far more convenient for the power to say, we were reluctant, we were pressured. Pontius Pilate was pressured. He washed his hands of it. Pontius Pilate wasn't pressured. That's just obscene. It's far more dangerous to admit that Rome killed him, because that's what we do to people who speak like that, even though it's documented history that that's what Rome did. But the robes become the scapegoat, and the title of the high priest becomes the mask, and the blame walks away wearing someone else's name. The tragedy, the real tragedy, is that the man on the cross was a Jew, and his followers were Jews, and his movement was Jewish. So they didn't kill their enemy. They lost one of their own. The story has been rewritten so well and so often and so persistently that the victims inherited the crime and the empire inherited the innocence. That's not just propaganda. That's a masterclass. That's a masterpiece. And it's what we've been exposed to for lifetimes. And it's what they relish in, because again, if we can control if you tell the people a lie long enough, they begin to believe it. This is Joseph Goebbels. But Pilate was absolutely not some gentle, reluctant man on this whole thing. The gospel narratives soften him for political and theological reasons, especially as Christianity moved into the Roman world, especially during Constantine's time. But Pilate's broader reputation was always brutality, suppression, violence. Rome crucified Jesus. Crucifixion was Roman state terror. So the slander works by displacement. Rome kills Jesus. A compromised local elite helps deliver him. A small group acts out of fear. some out of power, money, and self-preservation. Then later, propaganda turns that into Jews killed Jesus. That's the lie. It takes a Jewish martyr killed by empire and then uses his death to persecute Jews for centuries. I mean, it's spiritual theft. It's historical inversion. It's empire laundering its violence through theology. So Jesus is not murdered by the Jews. Jesus, leading a Jewish movement, is executed by Rome and compromised by religious elites who chose power over prophecy. Those individuals. The crime of a few opportunists was turned into a blood libel against an entire people. And that lie became one of the most poisonous pieces of propaganda in human history. The cross was Roman wood, Roman law, Roman terror, but history handed the blame to the Jew because empire has always known how to wash its hands and leave the blood on someone else's name. That's why I'm saying our criticisms of Zion, our criticisms of Israel, we need to be very careful that we don't slide into those old tropes, that empire isn't trying to wash its hands, that Benjamin Netanyahu might not be the Caiaphas of our time or the Capo of our time. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum defines anti-Semitism as hatred, prejudice, or hostility directed at Jews. And the IHRA notes that one anti-Semitic pattern is holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the state of Israel. A government is not a people. A people is not a government. Again, that's true for Israel, America, Palestine. It's true for religions, Christianity, Islam, all of it. Criticizing Netanyahu, Trump, Biden, or any administration's politics, that's fine. Turning that into contempt for Jews, Muslims, Christians, Palestinians, Black people, or Americans as a whole, it's prejudice. And if you don't know the history of things, you might want to be a little bit more careful because you could be becoming an unknowing participant in these demonizing identities. We can fiercely oppose someone like that with these Israeli settlements. I wrote a song, I think it was in 2005 or 2008. It was sometime around that time. I don't know if I might have even mentioned this in a previous episode, but I remember the lyrics for the first part of the verse, and it said, "They're there with an iron grip from the West Bank back to the Gaza Strip. And God, it sounds like a whip to me, an echo of Egyptian slavery, and how can they justify when they know how it feels to be occupied? When in Rome, it seems like Jesus ain't alone." And I can't remember the last part of the verse, but I was writing about this situation again in 2008, I think it was around the time. There's a difference between criticizing a government and criticizing the idea of Israel as a place and as a movement towards home. So I believe we can fiercely oppose Israeli settlements, bombing campaigns, occupation that is unjust, the conduct of a government without being anti-Semitic. But once the language shifts into Israelis are evil, Zionists control everything, not too far off from that are the Jews are the problem. There's collective guilt language that starts to bubble up from that. And again, when you see it in the posts and the comments, you can tell that there's something adjacent there. It starts crossing from political criticism into ethnic or religious scapegoating. So saying the Israeli government is committing abuses It's like criticizing a police department. There's so much police brutality. We're criticizing an administration. Saying Jews are the problem is like blaming any group of people. Like the Muslims for one regime, or the Christians for one corrupt church, or for the Klan. It's a category error with blood on its hands. We've seen where it goes. So no, being anti-Netanyahu is not the same as being anti-Jewish. But people love to smuggle old hatred through new vocabulary. That's what I'm saying we have to be careful of. You don't get to launder prejudice through geopolitics. So that flag, the Israeli flag, we see this Star of David, which of course is a religious symbol. And that's where it becomes, again, such a thin line, because a flag is not a free pass for war crimes. And outrage at war crimes is not a free pass for bigotry. But when you see this Star of David with that circle with a red slash through it, this anti-Israel, you got this overlaid anti-symbol over a Star of David, it becomes very slippery. And that's what I'm getting at, because of course it's probably a purposeful thing to put a religious symbol and a symbol of a people on the flag that then creates a little bit of scrutiny. But if I were just to tell you, like, think of a negative red symbol and think of a Star of David, the first thing that would probably pop into your head is a swastika. And so when we have this circle with a slash through it going over a Star of David, it creates a space. My point is that we should be suspicious of that space. And if your critique can't distinguish between a state, a government, a people, and a religion, then it's just tribal rage dressed up as moral clarity. And I know people aren't going that far yet, but we would never accept America did evil, therefore Americans are filth. It's just lazy. It's dangerous collectivism. And what I'm saying is that Jews deserve protection from that logic. So once we start treating Zionist as a spooky all-purpose slur, we're one step away from saying Jew with plausible deniability. That's what I'm worried about in that space that's being created. People thrive on some of that confusion. Sometimes people use Zionist in this precise political way, but it doesn't have that definition for everyone. It doesn't carry the same definition. And sometimes they use it as a space creator, a sanitized substitute for Jew as a slur. And everyone can feel the substitution, even when they're denying it. So the danger is not just a dictionary definition. It's function, tone, and target. It's perspective. The question is, are we criticizing power, or are we activating an old hatred? Moral seriousness requires consistency. If we reject racism, then we reject collective guilt. If we reject nationalism run wild, then we reject ethnic scapegoating. If we reject dehumanization, then reject it even when the target is a group that we currently feel justified in hating. And people feel morally electrified by the crimes of a government, but then slide into an ancient intoxication of blaming people. That slippage is why precision matters. Until next time, I'm JJ Weinberg. That's my piece. Peace.
Israel, the occupier, cut the timeline.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg. This is my perspective.